Hey there, writer rebels. Have you ever wanted to get better at setting that scene and putting your readers right in the character's shoes? Well, today we're going to talk about how to level up your descriptions and set way better settings. Hey there, rebels. It's me, Scarlett Kol. I'm a young adult author, YouTuber, and storyteller, and welcome back to my channel. If you've been here before, thank you so much for coming back. And if you've never been here, welcome. Today, we're going to talk about descriptions and more specifically settings and how to work with that within your prose. The idea for this video came from one of my subscribers, Michelle McMiken. She left a comment on my video about dual POV, and I will leave that in the cards for you up top if you want to check that video out. And she had mentioned how she would like to get better at descriptions. I'm not exactly sure if this is what she meant, so if it is, here you go, Michelle. And if it is not what she meant, well, thank you anyway, because it gave me an idea for a video. So today we're going to talk about setting. Setting is extremely important when you are telling a story. I'm sure most of us know that ever since they were a little kid and, reading stories with it was a dark and stormy night as opposed to a sunny day on the beach. So we know setting is important. And when you get into bigger stories like Harry Potter or something like that, how world building can completely build on those settings and totally make your readers fall in love with your story. So the tips that I'm going to give you aren't exactly how to write them. It's more of kind of trying to expand your writing repertoire so that you do get better at writing settings and you can get better at world building and basically how you approach writing those things. So if you want to get started, here we go. The first thing most people think of when they think of setting is what you see. You're at the beach, you're at the mountains, you're in a cabin in the woods, wherever you're going to be, it's what you see and what that setting looks like. If you want to write better settings and better descriptions, one of the best things that you can do is instead of how your character sees their setting, write how your character interacts with their setting. So what do I mean by that? Basically, what I'm saying is instead of standing back and explaining what something looks like, have your character move through that scene and drop your details in pieces to explain it as the story progresses. Why would you want to do that? There's three main reasons for that. Number one is show, don't tell. You hear that all the time. By having your character interact with the environment as opposed to just explaining the environment, you are showing the reader the setting instead of telling them about it. So, number one. Number two is it makes the scene more active. You could have let's say your main character is standing in front of a haunted house. They could have a great description of that haunted house. Or you could have them stumbling up that broken sidewalk and almost falling over on that rickety old banister and already be opening that creaking door instead of still standing back on the street describing the outside of the house. This brings your character with you through the story. They will interact more with the other objects in the setting as your character does, and it drives your plot and it drives your story forward as opposed to these long sweeping descriptions. Don't get me wrong, some long sweeping descriptions can be beautiful, but it also brings us to our third point, and that is to eliminate unnecessary details. Let's say, for instance, we go back to that haunted house example. We have someone standing on the outside, they're explaining every little thing about that house. Well, as interesting as that might be, a lot of those details probably don't make the plot any better. It doesn't progress the story at all, and detail upon detail upon detail isn't going to make the house any scarier. If you're forced to write your way through the story as the character experiences it, instead of just sitting back at what they see, you're going to focus on the details that are relevant to what the person's doing, how they're walking, what they're touching, what they're smelling, what they're seeing as they go through it. Once you get to the end, you may find out that you do need to add a little bit more detail to really make that scene shine, but essentially you're not going to be talking about all of the extra little things that, yes, could make for a prettier picture, but aren't really progressing your story. So this is going to restrict you in a good way by allowing you to only deal with the things that the character deals with. And obviously, if the character is interacting with those things, then they're going to be progressing your story forward, which is exactly what you want to do. So how do you get really good at, instead of describing something, interacting with it? One of the exercises that I have done several times, and I still do it if I get frustrated, is to try and be a character in a room. So I like to do this at least once inside and at least once outside, and I do this periodically just if in case I'm stuck. But find a room in your house and stand in the doorway and go through the room, maybe go around in a circle, lie down on your bed, whatever, of how you would interact with that room. But instead of just walking or thinking about your steps, think about all of those little pieces. What do you touch when you go through there? Do you touch the doorknob? Do you run your fingers along the wallpaper? Do you tap on the piano keys as you pass by as force of habit? How is the sun coming into the room? Are there windows in that room? How does the light reflect on things? And try to pick up all of those little details of things that you would interact with and that you notice. If you stood there for 10 minutes, you'd probably be able to describe everything in the room. But if you closed your eyes at the door and opened them, what are the first things that you see? What are those things that stand out to you that make the room what it is? In a lot of times, we don't actually have to explain every single detail. If you told somebody that a scene took place in a hospital, as long as they got the idea that it was a hospital, you don't need to describe every single detail. Most people know what a hospital bed, like a hospital room, looks like. You don't need to describe everything. But getting those first little things of those rooms that will really pinpoint where you are will make it a whole lot easier for the reader to understand where you're going with this, but not be bogged down with all these extra details. Once you've kind of walked around the room and encountered it and kind of cataloged all of those things and how things feel and how you move through the space, the other suggestion is to stop, close your eyes, breathe in, and listen. What do you hear? What do you smell? If it's even possible, what do you taste? Sometimes like stuffy air sometimes tastes thick. If it's a very perfumey room, you almost taste chemically. There's different things for that. If you do this outside, obviously it's going to be a very different experience. You might hear birds chirping. You might smell fertilizer on the grass. You might hear the garbage truck 3 streets away. But this gets you moving through a space like a character and seeing those details that actually stick out to you. There's a lot of details in the room or in the park or wherever you are that aren't going to stick out. And those are the extra details that your reader probably doesn't need either when you're describing a setting. This little exercise with walking through a room or sitting in a park is also really helpful with character description. Next time you run into somebody, or once you're out of self-isolation, when you finally see somebody again for the first time in a long while, what is the first thing that you see about them? If you're on the internet and you're discussing with them through Zoom or Skype or whatever, as soon as that picture flashes on the screen, what do you see about them? Do you notice their eyes? Do you notice their lips? Do you notice their hair color, what they're wearing? So when you go to describe your characters later, you can always draw back on those details and be like, what are the things that actually stick out about a character, rather than just listing off all of their physical traits as soon as they enter a room. I also mentioned about sitting there and breathing and smelling. One of the big things about setting is using all of your senses. You can describe what a character sees, but explaining how things feel with your hands or your feet, how something smells, how something tastes, this will trigger memories and set a scene a whole lot better for a reader than just telling them what they see. People can visualize things very easily, but memory is actually associated with smell a whole lot stronger than sight. So if you can describe smells or sounds, people can be transported into those spaces. They can be just drawn into your world by those simple little details that are using the different senses. I would like to caution, you obviously don't want to talk about the taste of everything in the world. Otherwise, it's going to be a little bit overwhelming. And if you overuse that stuff, then it's going to get a little much for your reader. And I'd be very interested to see what kind of descriptions you come up for the taste of absolutely everything. But Using your five senses and using them strategically, you'll be able to draw your reader in a whole lot faster, and they're going to remember that scene a whole lot more than if you just explained it from the outside. Another tip for doing settings is to focus on unique details. This won't happen in every single scene, but if you have something that you want people to remember and you want to just totally punch it up, find something that's either a little bit unique or different about that scenario. There's a story I read one time where they were talking about spying on the stairs at their father, watching television. And one of the things they remember is, or they explained, was the U2 song coming off the television. That was great because it was something a little bit different. It wasn't something that people would normally talk about, rather than the television and the plant and the armchair. And it also set the time very quickly. I had an idea of what time period we were talking about when he was referring to a band. Obviously, pop culture references are a little risky sometimes because it can date your work, but it's just an example of something unique that you can draw into that. Are there unique details about your setting that are important for the reader to know or would enhance the reader experience? Like when I use the hospital example, hospital rooms are usually pretty boring, but if you can explain a couple little details, maybe there's a heart monitor or something, that actually could tie right into your plot, that character is not doing as well. Or how are they dressed? Are they actually still in their street clothes, or are they already into a hospital gown? Those little bits of setting and detail can really bring setting alive for your reader and have them understand a lot more what's going on by having unique and different details rather than the generic "there was a chair" kind of stuff. The next thing that you can do about writing better settings is to utilize your character voice. If you're writing in first person, I find this to be a little bit easier, but you can also do this in third person or whatever style you are using. Basically, what it is when you are describing things in your setting, make sure to use your character's voice when you explain things. For example, I have a book coming out in November called Keeper of Shadows, and we have two characters, a boy and a girl, and in one scene she blushes. Instead of saying that she blushes or she turns red, he says that she turns Arizona Cardinal, which is a color of a professional sports team. So it kind of gives you a little bit about the character because we know that he likes that sport. Plus, it is a different and interesting way to explain something that happens on a regular basis. People do blush or turn red or get angry very often. So this was a way to do that using his voice. In the other person's character, she will not explain things like he does because they're each going to explain the same thing in their own character voice. By being able to do that, you show more about the character and you make things a little bit more interesting. Is your character really into cars? Are they into sports? Are they into music? Are they into books or movies or something like that? When somebody walks into a setting, if they're a big movie buff, they might be explaining it in ways that are similar to how shots are set up on a movie scene. Or if they're a reader, they might be drawn more to the bookshelves in a room, even though they're off to the side instead of the pool table in the middle of the lounge of this house. By using your character's voice and character, essentially, you can draw out those unique details, like I had said before, and tie them back to the character. And the other thing to be cognizant about character voice when you're describing setting is how that character is feeling in a particular setting. So on a busy day, let's say you worked all day and it's just a normal day, you drive home, traffic is busy, no big deal. The next day you go to work and you have a really, really bad day. Your boss is awful. You think you're getting fired. Somebody's not doing their job, whatever. By the time you get out of the office, you are just so frustrated. You drive home, traffic isn't any busier than any other day, but all of a sudden you've got a ton of road rage, or you're just so frustrated, you're yelling at cars, you're doing all this sorts of thing. On the other hand, let's say you have a normal day. You walk home from school every single day and nothing changes. You live in this plain, small little town, but then one day your crush asks you out. So maybe that walk home is going to be sunnier and it's going to be brighter, and you're going to notice different details that are going to be a lot happier than it would have been on any other day. In my book, Wicked Descent, we have that a couple of times. When my character gets up one day and is going off to school, she's commenting how it's bright and sunny and happy, and it's going to be a good day and things are going to be positive. A couple of days later, things have not been going well for her. So now she's talking about how the sun is mocking her, and the sun is blinding and evil and torturous. There's no difference. It's the same sun, but it's how that character is feeling at that point. This also, first off, gives me different descriptions of the same thing. Plus, it allows me to tell more about how my character is feeling and my character's mindset without actually going, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm happy. It's allowing that setting to interact with my character, and my character to interact with that setting, like I suggested at the beginning, and giving the reader more of a full experience than just simply saying it was a bright sunny day. And then my last tip isn't necessarily something that you need to use all the time. It's one of those things where it's kind of like a bonus points extra homework thing, that if you really wanted to really punch up a scene in a book, these are some of the things that you can do. And that's getting your setting to do double duty. What do I mean by that? Well, there's kind of two ways I kind of think about it. One is that it can make things harder for your character. So I'm sure everybody's seen that movie where everything's going wrong for a character and then all of a sudden it starts to rain. Yes, we could have done that scene normally without the rain, but the rain makes everything so much harder for the character to do. In Keeper of Shadows, which is that story I was talking about in November, it's an exceptionally hot spring. So when my main character Kellen is working on a motorcycle on the driveway, it's exceptionally hot. It's really, really hot outside. It's hard for him to concentrate. It's hard for him to focus. And then when the other character talks to him and they're trying to have this deep emotional conversation, it's really hard for him to concentrate. And he keeps getting really, really frustrated and very, very short-tempered because the weather is impacting his emotions and how he can move through the scene. And it makes all these things harder for him. It doesn't necessarily have to be the weather. It could be the terrain. It could be that it's nighttime instead of daytime, or daytime instead of nighttime. Obviously, trying to pull a bank heist at noon is going to be a lot more difficult than to try to do it at midnight. So having your setting and those little bit of nuances can really impact your plot and your character and make things so much harder for them. And what happens when you make things harder for your character? You increase the conflict in your story. And the more conflict you have in your story, the more interesting your story is. The second way you can have your setting impact your character like that is it can make things easier. So for instance, most people know the kiss the girl scene in The Little Mermaid. They're sitting on a boat, nobody's really talking, and you have Sebastian, obviously, he's pulling the strings here, but it's all of those little things. It's the sound of the birds and the lapping of the water and the moonlight and all of those little pieces coming together to make things more impactful. For instance, let's go back to rain. If you've ever seen The Notebook, I know so many people who've seen it, or even if they haven't seen it, they've seen that iconic kiss in the rain between the two main characters, Allie and Noah. So they could have not had it in the rain. It could have been a beautiful sunny day. It could have been gorgeous outside. But for some reason, that rain scene gives that immediacy. It gives it that carnal passion that they were looking for in that scene. If they had done it on a bright sunny day, it might not have the same immediacy and that same impact that that scene did. So when you are looking at trying to make a scene more impactful, is there something from your setting or the weather that you can use to make it punch up all that little bit more? And another way that your setting can impact your characters and your story in such a positive way is that it can be used to convey theme. We'll use my book Wicked Descent for an example. That book takes place in the middle of November to the end of December. It has to deal with elemental magic, demons, witches, all that fun stuff. Essentially, there's a few little things that I would probably have to change, but I could probably write that story about any season of the year. But I wrote it during the winter time. Why is that? First off, I kind of like Christmas, but the other thing is that there's a lot of snow. There's a lot of barren, snowy landscapes in this. My character is not super fond of snow, which is kind of like myself, but why does that matter? a lot of the stuff that happens within that book is she is really, really isolated through the whole story. She's in a new town. The friends that she makes end up bullying her. She doesn't really have a lot of friends. All of her friends from her old city have kind of cut her off and moved on with their lives. She is having this rift with her mother, which she normally doesn't have. So she's kind of being iced out with that. And then we have these scenes where, she's forced to be outside and we're in this cold, wintry kind of space. So it's really like driving home that theme of isolation and being iced out. Whereas had I done that in the summertime, it might have still been an effective story, but it's not going to have that same punch as it did by letting my setting enable my theme and put that across to my reader. Well, hopefully you enjoyed these tips, and hopefully some of them made sense to you and you'll be able to apply them to your next project. Like I said, not every tip is going to work in every situation, and sometimes you need to keep the setting simple so you can move the story forward. However, if you have a scene that you do want to level up, then you should try and work on leveling up your setting, because it can have a huge impact and can help draw your reader in and help tell them things about the characters that maybe even they didn't even know. So that's all I've got for this week. If anybody ever has anything they would like me to talk about, I would love that. And you can put that in the comments below. If you would like more videos from me, make sure you're hitting that subscribe bar and the notification bell, and they will let you know when I'm releasing one, which is typically every Thursday. For this week though, I will be having an extra video coming out on Monday related to retellings. I am part of the Once Upon a Fairy Tale blog tour, so I will be having a video on Monday that will on why I love to write retellings, and then on Thursday I will be doing my regular writer video on tips on how to write retellings. So if that's something you're interested in, you should definitely check that out next Thursday. But it was great to see you guys again, and hopefully you got something out of this one. Have a great day. Thanks, guys.